One of the biggest physical threats and former welterweight champion versus the UFC's original BMF. Jorge Gamebred Masvidal versus Tyron, the chosen one, Woodley. This is the mythical matchup that we are going to be looking at today. And through the late 2010s, these two were easily some of the most popular and successful fighters on the entire UFC roster. And somehow, they never actually fought each other. Well, that's primarily down to them being friends through both of them actually training out of American Top Team, and they've both indicated that they've helped each other in their personal lives, so they're friends that just did not want to fight. Now, the only instance that this matchup could have came to fruition is in 2017, where Jorge Masvidal did an interview with Fox Sports, stating that he would fight Woodley if it were for the title, which Woodley did hold at the time. But obviously, that did not happen, as Woodley was dethroned by Kamaru Usman a few fights later. So let's look at what would happen if these two actually did fight each other, prime versus prime. As we are looking at both of these guys in their primes, we will analyze them fighting at both 3 and 5 rounds to explore the differences in their styles when they fight at different paces, if it makes it 3 or 5 rounds. Now, for Jorge Masvidal, we are looking at him as the 11th ranked fighter, flatlining Darren Till at number 3, which shot him straight up the rankings. He then decapitated Ben Askren, and then he beat Nate Diaz in 2019 to become the first ever BMF at 34 years old, cementing himself as one of the most popular MMA fighters in the world at that time, just before losing to Kamaru Usman in 2020. That is the prime fighter we're going to be looking at for Masvidal. And Masvidal was one of the most credited boxers easily in the welterweight division at the time, giving him a fan favorite style that earned him 2 Fight of the Nights and 4 performance bonuses in the UFC. He held a record of 35-13, going 17-9 with decisions, 2-2 with submissions, and most notably, and credit to that brawler boxing style, 16-1 with KOs. And then for Tyron Woodley, we are looking at him as the 36-year-old welterweight champion. He defended his belt against Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, Damian Maia, and then he took out Darren Till at the end of 2018 before also losing to Kamaru Usman and ultimately losing his welterweight belt. But Woodley gained that belt in the first place for clear and obvious reasons. I mean, up until coming into the UFC, he was a pretty one-dimensional wrestler with a bomb of a right hand, but he really rounded out his game coming into his prime. He achieved 4 consecutive title wins, a Fight of the Night bonus in his 1 draw to Wonderboy in a barn burner of a title fight, and 4 performance bonuses. He held a record of 19-3-1, going 7-2 with decisions, 5-0 with submissions, and 7-1 with KOs, which really just displays how well-rounded his game really did become. Now, the physical differences do play a pretty large role in this mythical matchup video, as Jorge Masvidal does come in naturally on the smaller side, as he fought at least 21 of those 48 fights that he had at lightweight, all the way up until 2015. There was a few catchweight fights in there at 160, but then in contrast to Tyron Woodley, Tyron would have to cut an arm off to make lightweight. So he is just naturally the bigger fighter, just out of that sheer size. I mean, you look at him, he's a brick shit house of a guy, an absolute muscle nugget. And Masvidal is lighter on the feet, but is less explosive, and definitely is not as strong as Tyron Woodley, being a natural welterweight fighter. But when we look at other factors like reach, they actually both have the exact same at 74 inches, with Woodley having a leg reach of 42.5 inches and Masvidal having a 39.5 leg reach, which is pretty small for welterweight. And Masvidal is 2 inches taller at 5'11" compared to Woodley at 5'9", which you would think would be good, but stylistically, it's actually a detriment to Masvidal due to Woodley's style on the feet. Woodley's overhand strikes, that will line that up with Masvidal's chin perfectly with that height difference. But ultimately, stamina-wise, is quite possibly the biggest issue we can pull here, and it gets worse for Masvidal in this. As in this time, Tyron Woodley was the bigger guy, the more explosive guy, but still had a better gas tank than Masvidal, because Masvidal getting into anywhere near those championship rounds, even into the third, he would start gassing out. But now turning it around from the physical dilemmas that Jorge Masvidal does have, the technical striking, in particular the boxing that he has, is where he pulls through with the advantage here over Tyron Woodley. And Woodley would literally agree to that, and has, because he said at the time that Masvidal was the best pure boxer in the UFC at that time. Now, Jorge Masvidal primarily does fight out of the orthodox stance. He strikes very well up close in the clinch with very good elbows, nice knees up the middle, which he showed very well against Nate Diaz in their fight, just before landing his very nice head kick. And when it comes to his kicks, he has very nice body kicks, especially with that right leg, the power leg from that orthodox stance. But most importantly, the boxing combinations are very dangerous. He mixes up the speed mid combination very well. He just really keeps it a mystery when it comes to his tempo. Multiple times he has thrown like a pretty slow 1-2, and then he just rips very, very fast hooks upstairs to the body, especially when he's getting up close. His tempo, that is the word. It definitely throws his opposition off, and that's where he's found success. Now, he loves a very tight overhand and then a left hook to follow that up, along with obviously that dirty boxing with the uppercuts and tight hooks as well. A big problem for Masvidal though is the takedown threat, which will hinder Masvidal's power kick weapon and also any form of head kicks against Woodley specifically, because Woodley has the option to just drive him down for a single leg, which limits Masvidal's arsenal. And on Tyron Woodley's side, look, his striking has definitely improved leading up to his prime, and the raw power is definitely on his side compared to Jorge Masvidal, but the fluidity in his striking combinations in comparison to Masvidal is definitely lagging behind. Now, he also stands in an orthodox stance. He's got the killer right overhand, that power overhand. He's got very good clinch knees up close as well, and most importantly, in connection with that overhand, he has very nice feints on the feet, very nice feints to set up those power strikes, which he used perfectly to set up against Robbie Lawler to KO him and win the title. Now, Woodley is also very comfortable in brawls. He showed that against Darren Till and obviously dropped him, countered him extremely effectively with that infamous right hand. And the problem for Masvidal is his mentality in the cage and getting into a firefight. He has a very bad knack of doing that even in his prime, and that is what presented a pretty clear lack of head movement on his side, especially in exchanges, which got him caught against Usman. He just doesn't perform the best defensively on the back foot or standing still and trading. That's the issue. He needs to be on the front foot. Now, their chins, up to their prime point, both pretty solid. They had both only been finished once each on the feet when it comes to KO TKOs. Woodley got taken out by Nate Marquardt for the Strikeforce Championship back in 2012 with a very nice elbow leading into an uppercut. And Masvidal got finished by Rodrigo Dam in 2008 with a straight right down the pipe. So it's safe to say that they were both pretty durable, but they were not invincible. But more so an issue on the side of durability is Jorge Masvidal got dropped very hard by Darren Till in the first round when they fought, but obviously he came back, got the left hook and shut Darren Till's lights out. But through Masvidal's career, he's been dropped multiple times by guys like Michael Chiesa, who has not got a single KO TKO on his record due to his suspect strike defense on the back foot. Obviously, he came back to win both, so he's definitely game, does have the durability there, especially through his prime, but you look at Tyron Woodley on the other side, Tyron had way less knockdowns in his career in compared to Masvidal, so he was a lot fresher at that point. Now that's good for Woodley, but statistically though, Masvidal would land at an average of 4 strikes per minute with a 48% strike accuracy. Now that 48% isn't anything to go home about and scream about, but Tyron Woodley shared the exact same strike accuracy at 48%, but with almost half the output. So Masvidal is more naturally active with volume as well as mixing the striking combinations together better, which is obviously where he has found almost all of his success in his career. And defensively, Masvidal is actually a bit more sound as well. He's got a 64% strike defense compared to Woodley at 55%. However, Masvidal has gotten in more pure striking fights due to not having a takedown offense like Woodley does. So he's absorbed a little bit more per minute over Woodley, and that's where that damage over that career has come in, and Woodley is more so the fresher fighter. Now, analytically, Jorge Masvidal should be winning this on the feet, but the one hit KO power Woodley has in his locker, if he lands clean, that could all be thrown out the window. But statistically, without that power, that shot hitting, Masvidal is better on the feet. So you would think that Tyron Woodley would dominate this discipline as a two-time All-American wrestler, which he does win it, but particularly offensively, he's not statistically that impressive. Coming into the UFC and rising to the top, he rarely actually shot for takedowns. The only times he was really successful was against Wonderboy in their first fight, and back when he fought Carlos Condit going 3-3 on takedowns. Otherwise, he's had 4 takedowns stuffed against Till and only landed 2 takedowns in 5 fights as a champion. Granted, he wasn't really that active in actually pressuring for them, so it's not like he's had a bunch of them stuffed. Now, this isn't necessarily a bad thing as well, because he's always trusted in his ability on the feet. But offensively, when it's actually on the ground, he's very good at using his weight to control opposition in half guard and using his body as like a wet blanket, as much as the fans hate it, which would be very effective against Masvidal, because that raw strength is completely there for Tyron Woodley and is not there for Jorge Masvidal. Now, Masvidal's wrestling offensively is not an option in this matchup, because Woodley defensively, extremely defensively sound. He has the strength to rip Masvidal above his hips if he's shooting for a double, and just in terms of the attributes statistically, at least an 88% takedown defense from him. I mean, he stuffed all 18 of Jake Shields' takedown attempts and all 21 of Damian Maia's. He used great wrist control, utilized the fence very well, a couple of fence grabs in there, but anyway, he maintained balance very well, obviously having that lower center of gravity, which he would have against Masvidal too, and ultimately, you just have to be able to outmuscle him to get him to the ground offensively with wrestling, and the only one that was able to do that, and that has the strength, is of course Kamaru Usman. But defensively though, Masvidal is pretty underrated. He has a 73% takedown defense, which would have been much higher before his 4-fight losing skid after this prime era we're talking about. I mean, he fought guys like Damian Maia, fought guys like Benson Henderson, who have decent wrestling, and obviously stopped Ben Askren before he could attempt one takedown or before he could even breathe. And he only started to lose out on the takedown defense in his later years, which was when he was on his losing skid. But even against Kamaru Usman in their first fight, he stuffed 11 out of 16 takedowns on short notice, and when he fought Colby, he stuffed 9 takedowns from him as well, so pretty impressive there. But ultimately, Tyron Woodley would be able to force a takedown early if he really wanted to, using that explosivity that he does have. But it will be a struggle keeping Masvidal on the ground if it does get there, because Masvidal does have pretty good scrambles, at least in that prime era. Granted, he didn't have to deal with someone as dense as Woodley though. That is where it's a bit of a mystery to see how Masvidal can really deal with that strength, especially from Woodley in half guard. Now, the grappling game is definitely more of an outlier here. I don't think it would be really super viable. I mean, Masvidal's best submission was the D'Arce choke against Michael Chiesa back in 2013. But aside from that, he had a rear naked choke against Eric Reynolds in 2009. So I don't see any threat to higher competition like Tyron Woodley. And Woodley did have a D'Arce choke more recently against Darren Till, which was most impressive overall with what we're looking at here. But his submission record aside from this is definitely padded. I mean, he hit all of the other submissions being an armbar, arm triangle, rear naked choke, and a Bravo choke. So a good versatile range, but that was all in Strikeforce in 2009, which was pretty much against cans if we're looking at it comparatively compared to Masvidal. So there's just not that much depth in this discipline for either of them. But I would probably give Woodley the slight advantage on the ground when it comes to the grappling, but his success is amplified by the wrestling and the strength that he has on the ground, and not to mention the ground and pound impact he has as well. Gotta be honest here, Masvidal has to be keeping this one on the feet. So we can see in summary that on the feet, Masvidal is more technical and can strike at more ranges, but Tyron Woodley has the explosivity, power, and cardio on his side. And on the ground, in terms of a grappling sense, they are basically even, but Tyron Woodley would have the slight edge overall with the wrestling base he has, amazing takedown defense as well. And this ultimately does depend heavily on Woodley's fight IQ and game plan going into this matchup. So we know Masvidal doesn't have the defensive capabilities on the feet or the offensive wrestling capabilities to ultimately deal with Woodley's power, or if Woodley gets momentum to try and take him down. Because if Wonderboy isn't taking out Woodley and is getting dropped, then Masvidal will come off even worse, because Masvidal's not as good a striker as Wonderboy. It's pretty simple. And Masvidal just doesn't have the option to shoot on Woodley when he is in danger. It's literally a one-way ticket to getting chinned by Woodley with the flaws that Masvidal unfortunately does have. Now, for Masvidal to win, he would need to time his body kicks to perfection without getting countered, because Woodley can either throw an overhand over the top, which size-wise would land right on Masvidal's chin, as I mentioned before, or he could easily just drive straight into him and take him down. And with that weight and that strength, he could definitely drain out the clock by doing that. He would also need to make sure his strike defense is airtight, a lot like what he was doing against Wonderboy. Masvidal had pretty good strike defense against Wonderboy in their third round, just kept a very tight guard and was countering effectively. Now that's what he would need to do. Tight guard, counter effectively, timing small combinations, and just hunting Tyron Woodley's body to drain that power as best he can. Because if he's not doing that, it's not a good day at the office. So ultimately, the 3 to 5 round difference won't come into play here, as Tyron Woodley, I'm gonna say, would get the first to second round KO in this fight. Masvidal has been dropped multiple times in the first round throughout his career, obviously by Darren Till, Darren Cruikshank, Michael Chiesa, and so on. I mean, he is more of like a mid-round fighter. He would have his best rounds within like rounds 2 to 3. But Woodley, with that power and explosivity, is just, he's not giving Masvidal a chance there. Now, if Masvidal could survive that first round, I can see him finding success in the third round as a bit of a swing round, getting more combinations off, you know, with Woodley's explosivity, with his striking slowly fading, slowly weaning off. But if it goes further, I would just fully expect Tyron Woodley to utilize an extremely heavy wrestling game through the championship rounds to look at a 49-46 decision. But all in all, prime for prime, I am confident that Woodley gives Masvidal the Robbie Lawler treatment in this fight. Timing a body kick from Masvidal, launching that overhand right onto his chin, flooring him, taking him out with ground and pound, and he would retain his title for another title defense. I hope you enjoyed today's Mythical Matchups video, and if you want to see more MMA based content, definitely check out the video on the screen, and please like, comment, subscribe, and I will catch you in the next one.